restart back here?
Hold on, it's going, hold on. All right, we're back on. They'll have to reboot back in, go out and go back in, but I don't know how to say that.
All right. Sorry about the technical problems. So,
It wasn't on us though.
it wasn't on us. So if we're still frozen at your house, you need to turn up the heat. No, just restart it. Text people that you know that may need to restart their
Help me out here, we got Ron's screen,
opportunity
we got
to
Dan's
watch.
screen.
He's getting
I got Ron and Dan.
Okay,
I got, what's the other,
I got him. I got John's.
Richard Young.
All right. Give everybody just a moment to get reconnected.
I got one watching on YouTube.
Ben was doing so well.
I've got nobody on Facebook yet.
Okay.
Ron, Dan, Richard. They'll have to go out and come back into the new stream. Diane
Diane Yeager.
Yeager, somebody got her.
Yeah, I'll get her.
She should know to do that. I didn't put my phone on vibrate anyway. All right. So,
Okay, that Ron is back on.
okay. All right, Ben. So if you don't mind, kick back off where you started and.
Okay.
Word for word.
All right. So I'll
Very
probably.
beginning.
So again, chapter 10 was, Paul's talking to the church about the responsibility of human responsibility to respond to the gospel, and specifically he's talking about the nation of Israel, the Jews, how they have not responded to Jesus. That's the big kicker right here. It's Jesus is the stumbling block that they have not believed. They have not trusted and put their faith in Jesus. So he's telling them, in chapter 9, I'll go back even one. Chapter 9, it's God's plan. Chapter 10, it's God's plan, but you still have a responsibility. And at the end of chapter 10, he talks about how, those who have not responded, they've been disobedient. They have not followed through. They have not put their faith in Christ. But God is still, his patience, it says, all day long I have stretched out my hands to a disobedient, obstinate people. God is still there. So now, if those, some of those who are within the church, they're probably thinking in their mind, he's answering a question, well, does that mean that those who haven't responded, has God completely, are they out? Are they done? And he's answering this question that, no, God still has a plan for Israel. God still has a plan for those who respond to the gospel. So at the very beginning, he says, I say then, God has not rejected his people, has he? May it never be, for I too am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham and of the tribe of Benjamin. So right there, he's giving them hope because he's saying, look at me. He was one of those who who rejected Christ, who was persecuting, who was very zealous for what he knew. He had a zeal for God, but he did not have the knowledge. He has this life-changing experience run in with Christ himself. He puts his faith in Jesus, and he's just showing them, this is proof that God has not rejected all of those. He is still there. He is still waiting for you to respond. So God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Or do you not know that what the scripture says in the passage about Elijah, how he pleads with God against Israel? So he points to the story of Elijah that we have, where Elijah cries out to the Lord, "They have killed your prophets, they have torn down your altars, and I alone am left, and they are seeking my life." So this, we've said this before, this isn't the first time that Israel has not obeyed God. They have, in the time of Elijah, they were killing prophets, they were tearing down the altars of God, and Elijah felt like he was alone. So he's answering these questions of, that some of these Christians who were Jews, well, are we alone? Is this going to be it? Is there no hope for the nation of Israel then? So pointing back to the story of Elijah was the same way. He thought he was alone. Elijah thought, God's people has turned against you, and I am alone. And God responds, I have kept for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So in the story, Elijah, and I'm going to not get it complete, but, Elijah's encouraged, like, for one, he's humbled by, you're not alone. God's in control. And, oh, by the way, I have 7,000 people who have obeyed, who have followed through. So he's giving them a reminder that, this is how Israel was in the Old Testament. God still, he did it with a few people then. He's going to do it with a few people even now. Because he goes on and says, about a remnant, about using a remnant. In the same way then, there has also come to be at the present time a remnant according to God's gracious choice. A remnant. A good definition, I can't give a good definition of a remnant, but it's not a very big number. It's a small number in a large nation of people. It's what we see God constantly do throughout Scripture. Doesn't need a lot of people to get his will done. He doesn't need a lot. So the idea is that God can do a lot with a little. And even with the small remnant that he has at this time, in the context of what he's talking about here, what he's going to do with that small remnant of those who have responded to Christ, he's going to tell us. He's using that remnant to, even though the whole nation of Israel did not reject Christ, most of them did. Mm-hmm. And he's going to take a small amount of those who didn't, and he's going to reach the world. He's going to reach the Gentiles. And he goes into that a little bit more on how he does, how he uses their rejection as an opportunity to spread the gospel to everyone else. But I won't go too much farther because it talks about, even though they've stumbled, they haven't completely fallen out. They haven't fallen out of grace with God. But he's just given some hope to those right now in these first few verses to the ones who were like, well, what about, you talked about, your desire, heart's desire for the nation of Israel's salvation, those who've rejected. There were some in there that I'm sure were like, well, I've got family, I've got brothers and sisters who've rejected. Is there now no plan for those people? Has God rejected those people? Paul uses himself, he uses Elijah, and he's just basically encouraging them, saying, God's going to do a lot with just a little. So, yeah, I'll stop there. So, hopefully that was, I know there's a lot of words for probably not saying much, but
You did great.
Keep going.
Okay. When I came to chapter 11, I read it in the very first verse. I say then, God has not rejected his people, has he? And so I read this and I'm like, you're starting off with the question, why is he asking this question? And I know you did a summary chapter 10, but I think it really boils down to, you get to verse 5, 6, and 7, the differences of righteousness and faith. Because the Jewish people had the righteousness through the law. And he was talking, no, that's a works approach. The Gentiles were saved, righteousness through faith. And he continues, with chapter 10, to how, talking about this righteousness and faith, and where do you get this? And he's like, it's something that's been told throughout, over and over again throughout history. Look, we've had prophets. Surely this message isn't new to you. And then he's like, that's why people are sent out. The gospel's getting out, and this righteousness through faith leads to this transformed life. And so if the Jewish people, I think at the time, they knew the law. They knew that, but for him to say, really hit home about righteousness through faith and hearing a message in this transformed life. And like you said, verse 21, all day long I've stretched my arms to a disobedient and obstinate people. And you're right. He's like, has God rejected these people? And he's, it's no, he hasn't. And you're right. He goes into Isaiah and he talks about, him pleading against Israelites. And I read that and I'm like, I had to go back and go in the Old Testament. Was he pleading against the Israelites, his people? And look, these were the prophets. This story is the prophet about Baal and his prophets and how they're cutting themselves, trying to call down fire from heaven. And he goes up there and he calls it down, bursts into flames, the very high point for him. And basically the king of Israel, his wife orders, hey, death threat. Tomorrow at this time you'll be dead. Or this will happen to you. So it's yes, he was pleading against them, and I couldn't help but to, I wonder, Paul is really taking a very personal, approach in here. And does any of that sound familiar with what Paul's going through? These people, the Jewish people, are they're following him, they're persecuting him, they're going after him. And he's like, look, please guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but there seems like he's spinning this and saying that, yeah, you know what, some of the Jewish people, they're not going to agree with this, and it's going to be tough, and there's going to be times you're thinking that you're alone, but look, you're not. And then you went into the remnant, and so I think that the transition and relating this to, like, wow, you're going to feel alone at times. You're going to feel like, is this really is this what I guess, I don't want to say signed up for, but is this really what, it feels like everyone's against you. And God says, no, don't give up. Look, I got this remnant. So let me stop there. You're smiling, George. I don't know.
No, you're all doing great. I think what helps when you're studying this part of Romans is to always keep in front of you, what is Paul doing? In all of this talk about Israel, he's answering the question, okay, if God is so good, if God is so powerful, sovereign, and everything else, what about his chosen people? He can't even save them. So he wants to make sure he explains how all of this works together, and this has all been part of God's plan. But all of this has gotten to verses 5 and 6 of Romans chapter 11. Okay, has he rejected his people? May it never be. In the Greek, that Hebraism, that phrase, is a powerful no. He would never, ever, ever reject his people. The problem is not God. The problem is people. Mm-hmm. It's tough being peoples. And he says, but okay, listen, he's not rejected the chosen people. I'm an Israelite. I'm one of those people. God saved me. I'm a descendant of Abraham by lineage, by birth. I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. He is saved by grace through Jesus Christ, but he still holds on to this this Jewish identity. But he says, look in the past. God didn't reject people who he formed. Again, God knows all of this. It's not that he's picking and choosing and moving people like, okay, I'm gonna save you and I'm gonna flick you off into hell. No, but he's like, listen, God knows how this all works out. And he brings up Elijah just to say, look what God said to Elijah. It's not so much Elijah being frustrated. Elijah is frustrated. God, All these people, they kill your prophets. They're stupid. They're idiots. I'm all alone. God, I can't do this anymore. Do something about them. And God's like, Elijah, relax. I've got this. There's 7,000 people. You don't even know about these guys who have never worshiped Baal.
Wait a minute. Stop right there in the middle of your thought. Who's he talking about? Even back then, who's he talking about?
People who are trusting in him.
But who? Yeah,
I'm not sure the question
okay,
you're
so
asking.
so let me rephrase it because my mind's somewhere else. The false prophets. What group of people, what nation are these false prophets members thereof? They're part of the Hebrew people, are they not?
Yeah.
Okay, I took me a minute to figure out your chain of thought.
Sorry.
No, that's, yeah.
But see, that's what he's doing here. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stop you, but it is important we see the connection.
like all of this. But then he says, and listen to verse 5 and 6. In the same way then, there has also come to be at the present time a remnant according to God's gracious choice. That's the focus. God's gracious choice. God gives grace. Well, it was that way in the Old Testament. You weren't saved by works in the Old Testament no more than you're saved by works in the New Testament. You've always, forever, been saved by grace through faith. That is how you're saved. This was true in the Old Testament. God has this remnant, and just like now, there are going to be people, God's chosen people, who are going to respond, because they've not. A bunch of people are not responding to God. Not God's fault, people's fault. Then in 6, but it is by grace. If it is by grace, it's no longer on the basis of works, otherwise grace is no longer grace. That is such a powerful statement of the gospel. He's teaching the gospel. People who receive, and he's been talking about, you're not choosing the right, you're making the wrong choice. You're not choosing Jesus. You're not choosing Jesus. You're not choosing Jesus. The only thing you got to do is accept the gift that God has offered through Jesus Christ. And if you think there's any other way, that you're going to get into the good grace, the righteousness of God, it won't work because it can't be on the basis of works. It can't. You cannot earn your way into God's grace. If you could, then grace is no longer grace. This is a master class in explaining what the gospel actually is. That's what he's ultimately, he has a heart for his people, but he's showing them how God's grace actually works. That's chapters, it's all of Romans. All of Romans is Paul explaining how grace works, what the gospel is. But, 9, 10, and 11, dealing with this problem that some people would have with, the Jewish problem, again, he chose these people, but they're not all saved. So how did God get it wrong? Well, God didn't get it wrong, and he's still working out, and he's not done yet. He's holding out, he's reaching out his hand to stubborn and rebellious people. God is doing everything, but if you read this, what's the part that's missing? Okay, God's done everything he's supposed to do. What's the part that's missing in the equation? The Jewish people, as a larger group, haven't responded in humility and submission to Jesus. That's the problem. That's what he's hoping people will understand, is it's all about Jesus. It's all about receiving this gift. And people get so hung up wanting to be like, okay, so, God has foreknown, in his foreknowledge, he's already saved before people are saved, so they can't help but be saved. Well, but that's not what you get when you're reading this. It really seems, as you keep listening, is yes, God foreknew, God knows who's going to respond, but the election is him setting aside and saying, here's how you're elected. Here is how you're saved. You become one of the elect when you surrender to Jesus, when you accept the grace through Jesus Christ. That is this overarching theme that he's doing, and we tend to miss it today. So again, grace, grace, grace. Those everything, and he's going to continue. But when you get to 5 and 6, and he's talking about God's gracious choice, what is he talking about? So God grabbed Ben and said, "My choice, gracious choice, my free gift choice is I'm forcing you to accept the gift. No, I freely reached out and offered you the gift. And how are you going to do it? Not through works, but through grace." Does that make sense? Okay. All right, Mike can chime in.
No, the only thing I want to say is, a while back I was asked if by someone, then why does people reject it? And my answer then was the same as it is now. I don't know why they reject it. Why did these people that Paul is trying to reach, why did they reject who Jesus is? They're rejecting the gospel. Go all the way back to chapter 1. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. But then he lays this out. We've got to give the Jews a shot first. And then, so why are these people rejecting Jesus? I mean, Jesus came from this nation. Why are they rejecting Jesus? I don't know. Why does he say, not to jump ahead, but why does he write what David said in verses 8 and 9 and following? Why did these people, let's go back to when Elijah was on the mountain. Why was his battle that day against these false prophets who sold themselves out from following the true God to following false gods? Why? I mean, think about it. Let's go on back a little farther. Why was it that God delivered this nation, these people, out of Egypt? They all saw it, the same thing with their own eyes. They all heard the thunder from the mountain. They all knew it was the voice of God. They say they knew it was the voice of God. They all saw how God provided for their daily nutrition and their protection and all this and that. They all saw it. Yet the moment that Mo is gone for a moment, they make this calf, and then when they're confronted, who was it that said, I don't know, I built this fire,
the gold
Mo,
went
and
in.
it just...
The calf came out. I don't know what happened.
So,
yo, brother.
I mean, honestly, and I'm not making light of it, but I don't know why people reject the gospel.
Well, I think there's a hint of it
Keep going. Keep going.
in the next few verses.
Yes, it is. But I will just set them up. Let's
set
knock them
it
down.
up so we can go.
So let's go on.
So verse 7. What then? What Israel is seeking, it is not obtained, but those who were chosen obtained it, and the rest were hardened. And then he goes on and explains that. Just as is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes to see not, and ears to hear not, down to this very day. And David says, let their table become a snare and a trap and a stumbling block and a retribution to them. Let their eyes be darkened to see not and bend their backs forever. I say then, they did not stumble so as to fall, did they? May it never be. But by their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make them jealous. Now, if their transgression is riches for the world and their failure is riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fulfillment be? But I'm speaking to you who are Gentiles, inasmuch as that I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry. If somehow I might move to jealousy my fellow countrymen and save some of them. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead. Let's stop there and go back and, well, let me do 16. If the first piece of dough is holy, the lump also. And if the root is holy, the branches are too.
Keep reading 7. Go ahead.
Keep going. We're going to have to go back and talk a lot.
We do.
But if some of the branches were broken off, and you being a wild olive were grafted in among them, and became a partaker with them of the rich root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. But if you are arrogant, remember that it is not you who support the root, but the root supports you.
Now you can stop there.
Okay.
Because we went from a messed up group of jealous Hebrews to a bunch of messed up, jealous Gentiles.
Arrogant Gentiles.
So go back and explain.
But so why do people reject? So Israel didn't obtain it. What was Israel trying to obtain? The righteousness of God. How were they trying to obtain it? Through works. They didn't obtain it because you cannot obtain righteousness through works, period. And those who were chosen, again, this idea of set apart, this idea of God foreknew and election and all of that, they obtained it. Well, how did they obtain it? He's talked about it. See, you can't read that and not go back to how he's already explained how people have responded to Jesus. That's how you're chosen. The conditions of being chosen are those who accept Jesus. And the rest were hardened. Well, we talked about that a couple chapters ago. Because he brings up Moses. This is not a new concept for them. This is part of their scripture. It's part of their history. It's part of their understanding that there are people who have so hardened their hearts against God that what does God allow? For them to be further hardened in their disbelief, in their rejection. And again, it's nothing new. He's cribbing together, Paul is kind of quoting from Deuteronomy, he's quoting from Psalms, he's kind of putting some things together. Hey, listen, God has always allowed people to be blind. He's always allowed them to harden their hearts. He's always allowed them to not get what God is offering. Why? Because that's what they've chosen to do. So God allows them, and he further lets them go into that direction. God, in his amazing, gracious love, will not force people to love him. Okay, you don't want to love me, don't love me. That is your choice. Oh, but by the way, God, because he's God, you don't want to love me, don't love me. I'm still here with my arms open. Spit at me, curse me, yell at me, reject me, say I don't exist. I'm still sitting here waiting for you.
Oh, you left one out. Crucify me.
Oh, good.
That's
what he did.
Yes.
Crucify me. I mean, he still sits there waiting.
Yep.
The gospel is so amazing. This good news is so good, we don't get it. Even when we reject him, he's always willing and ready and waiting for us to come back. Which again is another thing that this whole idea of election being that only some are chosen. It seems like God is saying, okay, people have rejected me. They're really outside of my will. They're not some saved people before they're saved. I mean, they've rejected me and they're hardened in that, but God is still waiting if they want to come back. Okay, I know. I just think that's powerful.
That is very powerful. We've got to understand a couple of things here. In the fact that being that we are created in the image of God, we have this free will. And because we choose not to. Why do people reject the gospel? Because they simply choose to. It doesn't make sense to me, but in reality, for many years,
You did the same thing.
I rejected the gospel.
All of us did.
I
at one
wanted to
point.
do it my way. I bought into a lot of lives of the world. I'm good enough, or, everybody goes to heaven unless, you're one of them. Nobody really explained to me what one of them meant, but I soon found out that I was one of them. You know? And you're right, George. Even those who reject him, he's still standing there going, listen, if you would just turn around, if you would just turn around and run to me, you're in. Now, George made a comment that I think we need to really focus on, in the fact that God has set up the means, the ways in which a person is saved or comes to salvation. God's the one who set it up, not man. So if we're going to reject the means or the ways in which to come to salvation, as George said, and we see here Paul saying to the Jewish people, that's on you. That's not on God. It's important. I feel it's important that we grasp the concept that the gospel is the plan for salvation.
Well, and Paul does this brilliant thing. Instead of looking at the Gentiles and saying, if you reject, it's on you. God has done everything he could do and putting it all on you. In talking about his Jewish brothers and sisters, the Gentiles overhear the gospel in a way that the only place you can go is to realize this is true of me too. I can't harden my heart. I can't think that it's my works that save me. And I also can't think that it's God's fault if someone I love, or even if I don't get saved. If I reject Jesus, I will not be saved. If it's true of them, it's true of me. But he gives so much hope, because in everything, God is sitting there reaching out to those rebellious people. And in 11, he goes on. I say then, they did not stumble so as to fall, did they? Great question. Okay, so they messed up. They missed the Messiah. They chose really, really poorly. But that stumbling, was that okay? So God's done with them. God hates them now. God is going to damn them for an eternity. May it never be.
Yeah.
Emphatically, no. And then he goes in and says, listen, this is all part of God's plan, and look how beautiful it is. But by their transgression, the fact that they've rejected Messiah, well, what's the upside of them rejecting the Messiah? Salvation's come to the Gentiles. Oh, and why is God doing this? In some way, it's going to make them jealous. Again, in jealousy, we have such a 21st century concept of all of these emotions that are a little bit different for them. The prayer, the hope, what God is trying to do, and what Paul is wanting to do, is this rich, loving, gracious relationship Gentiles now have with God will so motivate the Jewish people to wake them up, to soften their hearts, to go, man, I want some of that.
Can I interject for a
Please.
moment? And this ties in with the lesson, but in some ways, so hang with me. If we look back in the Old Testament, we see another time when the Hebrew people were jealous of Gentiles. All right? They were so jealous of the Gentiles, and they so much wanted to live like the Gentiles.
We want a king.
We want a king.
Yep.
Give us a king. God, hey, listen, y'all don't need a king. No, we want to be like them. Now Paul is saying, listen, how jealous are you? Now, again, God's plan has been to save all of mankind all along. But when you have a group of people that think they're special just because of their heritage, no. But listen, can't you be once again jealous for God as you were, your ancestors were? Can't you see what the Gentiles now have? Don't you long don't you long for that? Don't you want to be so jealous that you're saying, okay, I'm in. I'm in now. Oh, by the way, I just got to jump ahead because I love what he does. Oh, by the way, Gentiles, don't get all cocky about it. No, remember, God opened the door and let you in. Now, don't you be flaunting. Don't you be flaunting in front of them, because just like he let you in, he can take you out.
And don't make the same mistakes the Jewish people did. They got all puffy.
They got all puffy.
We're God's people, and so Gentiles, don't be all like, oh, we're special. We're the the chosen.
And then back in chapter 9, he said not all of Israel is of Israel. So it's this rejection of something, and that something is the gospel. And the gospel, in a nutshell, is that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, who came to redeem the world.
It's funny how history repeats itself, though.
Constantly.
Because you have the Jews and the Gentiles this way, and we're doing it again today. We think because we're in church, we're better than the people out in the world. They don't deserve it, It's the same thing all over again.
Unfortunately, in many cases, that's true. That's true. What do you think, Mike?
I would say we're talking a lot.
Where
you
you at?
guys.
What's on your mind?
I got a quick, I don't know if it's a question or not, but I think it's a conversation I've had, and I'm wondering, I think you've mentioned and answered the question already, George, but could you explain again on verse 8 where it says, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes to not see and ears to not hear. With that, I understand out of context, that's saying God has given the spirit, these people can't see they don't hear it, they don't see it, so this is, I've had this
No.
conversation. So can you tie that in in context, what is that referring to?
It looks like he's calling back to a couple of Deuteronomy, but also there's a section of Isaiah where the Lord has poured out upon you a spirit of deep sleep and has closed your eyes to the prophets. There's this history that the Jewish people have where they're the ones that are hardening their hearts, they're the ones that are rejecting, and God gives that over. God's like, okay, I love you. And we do this with our kids. There comes to be a point when our kids get to a certain age, they start making choices, and we know how it's going to end. But we also are like, I love you enough, and I want you to start growing, and I want you to start doing this. I'm not going to point this out to you. I'm not going to continue fighting on this. You have to come into this personal accountability and responsibility. So, we do it. And with God, see, we tend to think that, okay, if he hardens someone's heart, then he's rejecting them.
I think it comes down to the language barrier, too. God gave. We think when it says God gave, that he said he did this as a punishment. Versus he's allowing it to
He's
happen.
allowing it.
Yeah. So let me read. Let me go back to Deuteronomy.
Okay.
Deuteronomy chapter 29. Chapter 29, verse 1. These are the words of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to make with the sons of Israel in the land of Moab, besides this covenant which he had made with them at Horeb. And Moses summoned. Now, again, Scott's right. We don't understand the language here. All right, but let me read. And Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, you have seen all that the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh and all his servants and all his land, the great trials which your eyes have seen, those great signs and wonders. Yet to this day the Lord has not given you a heart to know, nor eyes to see, nor ears to hear. And I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out on you. Your sandals has not worn out on your foot. You have not eaten bread, nor have you drunk wine or strong drink, in order that you might know that I am the Lord your God. Now we could keep on reading. What's he saying? Is he saying in this section, which applies to this section, which applies to other texts, which applies to the words of Jesus, okay? Reading that for face value, is Moses saying here that God brought upon them their unbelief, or they chose to be unbelievable?
Do you want a secret answer?
They chose.
Go to Deuteronomy 29.
Yeah.
Read verses 24 and 25.
Well, I wasn't going to read all of that, but
Well,
you can go ahead.
the
read
whole,
it. Read
go
it
go
for
look,
us,
because the
Mike.
whole thing he's talking about how there's going to be all this calamity that comes upon God's chosen people in this promised land. There's going to be all these problems. There's going to be all of this, to the point where everyone's going to be like, what's going on here? So if you want to read
You want 24 and 25?
24 and
Yeah.
25.
All the nations will ask, why has the Lord done this to this land? Why this fierce burning anger? And the answer will be, it is because the people abandoned the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, the covenant he made with them when he brought them out of Egypt.
The people.
And he
The
goes on,
people.
and he goes on and talks about they worshiped false gods and everything else. So in Romans, when they hear this, what are they hearing? Okay, why are the Jewish people having a tough time? They've abandoned the covenant. They've done all of this. Is they've done this? That's what he's trying to get at. And then going back with David in Psalms, the Psalms that he does, talking about David is talking about the enemy, his enemies. Again, and his enemies are the enemies of God. If you're going to be an enemy, okay, then all of everything you have, may everything good in your life, everything, your table and everything become a snare and a trap, may become a stumbling block, may your eyes be darkened. Why? Why is this? Because you're rebelling against God. You're an enemy. And why? And that's when he gets into, they did not stumble so as to fall. Okay, they're not beyond hope. Why does God do this? To hopefully motivate them to come back. Does that help?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, and two, like you said, if he wouldn't have allowed their hearts to be darkened, and they still would have been seeing this benefits of what God had given them before, then they wouldn't come back. So they had to be shut off. Like you said with our kids, we have to let them do their thing once in a while, but there comes a point we have to stop it so that they see the good that was there before.
Yeah, because it's almost like God saying, stop it. Stop it. I mean, Jesus said the same thing to the Pharisees when he was on this earth. You know, you got ears and you're not hearing. You got eyes, you're not seeing. In Revelation, he says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says. So God and Paul here is calling for people to respond. It's our response. Here it is. I got $1 million for you right here. $1 million. You want to take it?
I like hundreds instead of 20s, so.
You want 100? I can't. Okay. But you see what God's offering, this greatest gift of all, this gift of grace. You can't earn it. You can't work for it. You can't keep the law good enough. It's a free gift. So just come and be my child.
And do you know a contemporary example of what I'm seeing here that I see now? Why would God allow all this hardening to take place? Well, I know that Mike's heard this a number of times. I've heard it a number of times. When you start to listen to people who are starting to become Christ-centered, people who have been in culture and have kind of sit on the fence, they've tried to sit on the fence, they're saying, man, it is getting so wicked out there. It is so dark. It is so evil out there that I'm now seeing Christ and Christianity in a whole new way. God uses, and we have such a tough time understanding that God will use all of this for his glory, that it's actually part of the gospel plan. That people will harden it. And you know what? Maybe I know there are some people that have to be hardened in their own wickedness so much, because if they're not, they think they're good people. I was one of those. I'm like, listen, I was highly educated. I was professional. I was dressing up in suits and going to court and testifying and working with families and kids. I was a good person. I was the kind of neighbor you'd want to have. I was nice. I was helpful.
Can we call and ask Tammy?
I was going to say, he's a good person, but he was eating devil dogs. Devil dogs!
I still eat devil dogs occasionally, especially the frosted ones. But as I continued to slip further and further into depravity and a very worldly way of looking at things, and then I came in touch with the gospel, I started to realize how wicked I really was. And you know, my first response wants to be, no, I don't need that. I'm okay. But the more I accepted who I was apart from God, the more I realized I needed him. So again, all of this, the Jewish people, they're messing up, their transgression brings the Gentiles in. It gives room for God to say, okay, now it's time for me to give this to the Gentiles. And look at what the world has gained through this. So like, don't be overly harsh. You know, love people that reject God just like God loves people that reject God. Because, and he says, you know, let's keep reading. Okay, so if their transgression is for the riches of the world, and their failure is riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fulfillment be? But I am speaking to you who are Gentiles, insomuch as I'm an apostle of the Gentiles, and I magnify my ministry. Pay attention to what I'm saying to you. I'm trying to explain this ministry that I have and what I'm praying it will happen. If somehow I might move to jealousy my fellow countrymen and save some of them. Because man, if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what is their acceptance going to be but life from the dead? If we can be concerned with people who are outside of the church, if we can actually love people who are dead in their sins, and they accept Jesus, like, why are we not celebrating that? Like, that is an amazing thing. That is life from the dead. And his whole thing is he's wanting to reach out to lost people. And right now he's talking about his lost brothers and sisters of Israel. And how amazing that will be. Yeah, it's great that you guys are part of the family. But what a better celebration if more people come into the kingdom. And this is an application for us today. Who do we want to walk in those doors?
The lost.
Anybody. What about someone who's a different ethnicity than me? Okay. What if someone who votes differently than me? Okay. What about someone who sins differently than me? Okay. What about someone who is personally my enemy? Someone who has hated me, someone who has hurt me, someone who has caused me tremendous pain in my life. Okay, let's find a seat for that person too. Why? Because how much better will it be when they go from dead to alive? That's the gospel. And that's what we should, and he is just talking about all of this. And he's going in, okay, the first piece of dough is holy, the lump also is. And if the root is holy, the branches are too. He's going to prove a point. None of this is about us. None of this is because of us. I'm not holy apart from Christ. It's his holiness. And I am definitely not the root of David. I am not even close to being the root. I don't sustain anything. I am just a happy little branch waving in the wind, hoping that I grow some good fruit someday. That's what I'm trying.
Hey, George, before you get too far, can I ask you a question? Or any guys, please? End of verse 12. What is their fulfillment?
That they would be saved.
Okay. I just wanted to, we skipped over that. What is a fulfillment? Like, is that, because I looked it up in the Greek, and that can be a completion, it can be, but that is a transformed life. Is that what he means by fulfillment?
Yep.
Okay.
If they actually get a hold of this. Their rejection did great things for the kingdom. You know, it led to the Gentiles coming in. But how much more awesome will it be if they're saved? Like, and I guess for me, when I'm so immersed in Romans to be gospel. It's gospel, it's gospel, it's gospel. I keep hearing gospel and everything because it's here. What kind of a heart to have that I want to see people come to Christ? I mean, that's the ultimate fulfillment. And we've been saying it for weeks now in our sermons, all year long. Our sermons really have kind of been, all these answers to these big, big questions are really one answer, Jesus. Mm-hmm. That's what the church has. That's all I have for anyone that matters. I can be clever. I can give people techniques to calm down anxiety and worry and stress, and to come up with a plan to make their marriage better, their parenting better, or just, everything. You can do all of that. Without Christ, none of it matters at all.
That's right. So let me remember, there's only one meaning of the text, but there can be different applications. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me give a different application before we run out of time. And this is important because this is for us. This is for the church. Paul is talking about this jealousy. Now, this jealousy is a burning desire to have what they have. You've heard me say this before. You're going to hear me say it again. Church, we should be living a life that is so awesome that those who are outside of Christ are jealous, not because we have riches, not because we have cars, not because we have bank accounts, not because no. We should be so full of the joy of the Lord. Our love for one another should be so abounding that people who are in the world, who are lost, says, man, I want whatever they're having. I want that. It's a longing. It's this jealousy that he's talking about is a longing, a desire to have that. I want that. We're living in a world where there is no hope. We should always exude hope from our very pores. When we sweat, it should be hope and love and joy and peace. And it's just an application, but it's so true for the church today. It's applicable for the church today. The church we shouldn't worry about praise music, and we shouldn't worry about what chairs we're sitting in, and we shouldn't worry about this. We shouldn't worry about so many things that we make a big to-do over. What we should be making over is Jesus first, and then one another. Jesus says, they'll know you are my disciples if you love one another. Yeah, that just blows me away that he has to tell these guys that he's walked with for a little over 3 years. Listen, guys, the only way they're going to know that you're one of my disciples. Did you catch it? He didn't say if you feed them or clothe them or
feed those naked people
and clothe the hungry.
Clothe the hungry, feed the naked.
He doesn't, does he? It's all about this love, love for God first, love for the body of Christ. We are to love the world. Please don't miss this. We are to love the world. But our love for one another, our love for Christians should be so powerful and so evident that people who are outside of the body of Christ go, why in the world is going on? I want some of that. I want to be accepted. I want to be welcomed. I want to be loved. I want to be part of this family. They laugh all the time, even when somebody dies. You know, they get together and they don't mourn like we mourn. They're joyful about it. I mean, that's just an application of the gospel, but Paul brings it up, and it's on me really bad, and I wanted to share that.
Well, it's funny that you go there, because I've been thinking about this. It feels like in the church today, we kind of push this message of going out and just loving people. We just love people. If you love people, that's going to bring them to Christ. Well, we're so busy loving people that it's gotten to the point we barely tolerate the church. Like people in the church barely tolerate one another, it feels like sometimes. And I'm like, that's not the way it's supposed to be.
It's backwards.
We start in the family of faith, and we learn to love one another deeply. We forgive one another radically. We serve one another. We could go through all the one another's. That's for the church first. And if we don't get that right, none of our outreach ministry is ever going to be as effective as it's supposed to be.
No, because the world's going to know us as what?
Hypocrites.
Hypocrites.
Or we end up offering them the things instead of offering them Christ. The love should be so authentic, and love is not a feeling, it's a choice. It's a matter of our will to put the needs and the good of someone else above my own. And that, again, and I say this in marriage counseling, and I need to remind myself in my marriage, but also here. What would it be like if I spent my life, if like everything about me was thinking more of everyone here, wanting good for everyone here more than I want good for me? Like, if I spend my last breath serving the congregation, I can think of nothing better. It's like, I love you and I want good for you, and you matter. Now, what if everybody did that? Ben and I are going to fight with each other tomorrow, and we're going to fight about who gets to serve the other one more. That'll be kind of cool.
I mean, you would win that fight.
My money's on Ben.
I'm a small
George
guy.
can't last too long.
He's wired.
Ben, just run for 2 minutes. You'll win.
I won't chase him.
Don't let him sit on you.
Yeah, we already went through that, didn't we? But in all seriousness, though, this is what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
You know, we live in a world of such brokenness that it has invaded not only our own personal families, our own personal life, but it's invaded the church. And we as a church just need to say, okay, enough's enough. Enough's enough. Let's rise up and be the church. Let's be the church in such a manner that the world outside is going, what in the world are those people doing? I want some of that. Tell me how does this work? And you're right, George. I love everyone. I love unsaved people. I love those people that hate my guts. I love them. I honestly do, and I desire for them to come to Christ. But I'm so over this. We just got to love them. No, we love the body of Christ first in such a radical way that those who are outside of Christ say, what is going on? Let's try that, because the other way has not been working, and the other way is not going to work because it's not biblical. So let's share the love of Jesus Christ with one another. So, all right, that's my sermon for tonight.
Good job.
We're going to stand and sing Just As I Am. And no, I'm just teasing. But, hey, next week we'll jump right back into the branches. And
Question and answer.
Question and answer next week.
What verse would
I
you
got a question about the branches. Oh, no, I'm just
About
teasing.
17.
So remember, if you do have any questions, send them to us via email, the port office, gmail.com. Send a text. You can text the church number. You can call the church. Diane would love to have 40, 50 people call tomorrow with questions, wouldn't you, Diane? And I can see her right now looking at Russ going,
What is he doing?
what is he doing now? But anyway, all right, remember, Jesus loves you, and
So do we.
Bye-bye.